Hey, podcast listeners, this is Steve. Today, we're talking safety, safety, safety. We're talking to Glen Moehling. He's with the Ocala Electric Utility, and he's their safety compliance guy. And he's got great stories to share. He's got great protocols to share. And if you're wondering how to embed a true safety culture, safety first, safely always culture within your organization, this is the episode you want to listen to. Greetings, I'm Steve Vancore, and this is the Florida Public Powercast, a production of the Florida Municipal Electric Association. This episode is brought to you by the good folks at Danella Grid and Storm Services. Thanks for the sponsorship. Each episode, we sit down with leaders and experts from Florida's public power communities, and we explore issues, innovations, and the people shaping our state's energy future and our present. Today's guest is Glen Moehling. Glen is with the Ocala Electric Utility, and I'm going to let Glen tell you his title because he's got one of those business cards that's 8 inches wide. Glen, first of all, thanks for being on the show. We really appreciate it.
Glad to be here. All right, so I've got the longest title in the city. I am the Utility Compliance, Safety, and Workforce Development Manager for Ocala Electric Utility.
I love that. Is there an acronym? I'm the
There sure was. It'd be a whole lot easier. I just usually say safety guy.
Safety guy. I love it. Well, it's perfect timing to be interviewing Ocala's safety guy because June is National Safety Month. And the Ocala Electric Utility is noted for an exceptional safety track record. In fact, when we were doing the warm-up, just to kind of discuss some of these topics, I mentioned the fact that you guys have, dominated on the safety awards given by FMEA. 20 out of the last 26 years, you've won major safety awards. This year at the lineman competition, you did very well. I will add second to Tallahassee. I'm not a home guy at all. Mm-hmm. And then you disassembled that. You said, Steve, the awards are not that important to me. Tell me a little bit about your thinking on that, Glen.
Well, first of all, I'm not going to take credit for the awards. First of all, going back to 2002, the 20 safety awards since 2002. I started here in 2016. I'll accept that I have contributed and maybe done a little bit of guidance or contribution to the safety awards. The safety awards, first of all, it's not a one winner takes all sort of thing. You can win a safety award. Either you have a perfect record or you can take second place or third place in your category. So we have won 20 times in the last several years, but that's just one of many who have also won safety awards. So to contribute to that, when I first started here in 2016, we had it seemed like we had kind of something has happened, so we're going to talk about it and we're going to move on and, make sure it doesn't happen again. But what does that really mean? Have we really put any mitigations in place to make sure that it won't happen again? Something also another kind of mentality.
Wait. Let's pause here for. Give me an example of that, because my mind is like, hey, somebody touched the wrong wire, they got electrocuted, they got hurt. You're like, hey, don't touch that wire again. Instead, one would say, listen, there's a reason this person touched that wire. We need more extensive training, more process, more procedures in place to make sure, not just, hey, don't touch it again. That old joke about, hey, doc, it hurts when I move my arm like this. Well, don't move your arm like that. That's not enough. And so can you give me an example of where, instituted changes? Let's just not just talk about it. Let's go ahead and implement some change to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Right. And when we talk about our mitigations, elimination, substitution, engineering controls, administrative controls, and PPE, you mentioned training. So in some instances, we have really had to step up our training and step up our use of PPE. I can say that in the last 10 years, our line workers have done a much better job at utilizing their PPE and utilizing their proper cover and their proper work procedures. So those are some of the things. We've also kind of taken a let's take it seriously sort of mentality. Along with the let's talk about it and move on mentality, we kind of had hey, the power's out, we got to keep going. Even though something happened, the power's out, we got to keep going. Or we're in the middle of this job, we got to keep going and let's get it done. But there's times you can't do that. So I started with a life, limb, or eyesight sort of thought. In other words, hey, if something happens and there isn't life on the line, there isn't a limb on the line or eyesight on the line, let's stop and preserve the scene here so we can see what happened and do what we need to do to make sure it doesn't happen again.
So that would be like a more of a forensic analysis. Again, you obviously, if a tree limb is laying in the middle of the road, you got to clear the tree limb. But if not, say leave it so we can have a better and deeper dive forensic analysis of what actually happened. I love that. Yeah.
Well, and not. So when we say something happened, okay, so did somebody actually get hurt? Perhaps somebody got hurt, but perhaps we had a near miss, and that near miss could have been a significant injury or fatality. Even with those near misses, in most cases, people are going to say, "Oh, wow, that was close. Let's move on. Let's get the job done." But my belief is that even in those situations when nobody got hurt, if we had a near miss, we've got to stop and we've got to analyze that and take a look at what actually happened. And I'll say over the years, it's been a process of getting out there and doing field visits, not just by me, but by management, to help build that trust that we're not going to come rolling in and firing people or taking heads off, so to speak, just because something happened. It happened for a reason. It didn't happen because just because somebody was stupid. It happened for a reason. So let's take it apart and figure out what caused it. So that's where preserve the scene kind of falls in there. Stop what you're doing, give us a call, let us know something happened. In many instances, the work can wait, or we can do other things until we've taken a look at the scene. And we'll take it seriously. We'll take it as seriously as we can so that we can. I guess
what you're saying too is a near miss clearly could have been a hit. And absolutely, the best way to avoid a hit is to look at these near misses and then go, okay, what can we do better? And I want to pause on something, Glenn, that you said. I was interviewing this gentleman who does like these national speeches and stuff, and he talked about living your values. And at first I thought it was just like pablum. But I realized what you're saying here is we live our values, because if you're saying we care about safety is our number one priority. Now, a lot of people say that stuff, but they don't mean it. And when you live your values, it says, well, we're not going to get that electricity back on at that, on that cul-de-sac, on that road, until we understand first what happened. And so sometimes, it's kind of like when you say, oh, we value family life. And then somebody says, hey, I need to go home a little early today because I'm coaching my kids' Little League. No, you've got work to do. You're setting your side. Then you don't value family life. And so those values have trade-offs. So what you're saying, I think, is what's most important, and we're going to live this value, is protecting the life, limb, and the eyesight of our team members, to say, stop, let's make sure we're doing this safely. Don't just rush to the next job, because if it's about metrics, about getting the next job done, then you're sacrificing safety. Did I capture that correctly?
Well, and probably the best thing you said was that safety is our number one priority. My eyes were open just a couple years into this job when someone said to me, well, you can either say safety first or you can say safely always. Okay, because safety first says, well, you know what? It's first right now. That's a priority, and sometimes priorities change. But if we say safely always, that is, as you say, a value, and that's something that we hold and cherish and do all the time.
How do you keep that focus on an on? I mean, obviously, it's your job title or 1/8 of your job title. How do you keep that focus on safety and not on? Because look, I remember talking to a newspaper publisher for Gannett, and he said every morning I wake up and I look at which stories got the most clicks, which stories had the deepest engagement, which stories, and you're like, oh, so you've sacrificed true journalism for that, and in your business it's got to be about power outages, lack of brownouts, timing and all that kind of stuff. How do you maintain that focus on safety? Have you set metrics for safety? Are you constantly engaged in updating your team? What is the processes internally to keep people focused on safety?
Well, as I said earlier, I think one of the main ways that we do that here is through the management presence. And we actually have a requirement of our leadership in the operational divisions to do a certain amount of field visits per week, per month, and we track that. I think that's probably the most effective thing is for the managers to actually be there and do those field visits, those safety visits. Because it does a couple things. It builds trust and it lets people know that management cares, that we're concerned about this and we want to. And again, it's not a matter of we're going to come rolling in and firing people and taking off heads. It's a matter of we're going to make sure that everybody has everything that they need to do their job properly.
My dad worked in a pocketbook factory when he was young. And the criteria there was, turning out the number of pocketbooks. And the owner of the facility, who happened to also be my uncle, took all the safety guards off the machines so they could speed up the work. And what was valued in that organization was how many pocketbooks can you assign. There was like a riveting thing that they remember to put the little buttons on. And he lost part of his finger as a result of that. Obviously not life-altering, not life-changing, an annoyance having only part of your finger, but putting the metrics of production ahead of people's personal safety sounds to me like that's the dilemma. And what your team has done by management presence, by extra training, by the stop and evaluate, do a forensic analysis of what went wrong or almost went horribly wrong, sounds like you're putting those values into practice.
Right.
You have a special approach to the pre-job briefing. I never thought I'd use this with an electric utility or electric authority or electric podcast, but the Swiss cheese model. Talk to me about this. You're smiling. What the heck is the Swiss cheese model? I thought it was a great way to make a little sourdough bread, a little tomato. It makes a great sandwich. But what do you got?
Right. Well, I mean, so there was actually two parts of that question. You talked about the pre-job brief, and our distinctive approach to that. We use many utilities use a electronic form, and so do we. We use a platform called Survey 123, so that the foreman can do a job brief online, and it's immediately documented. It's all done right there. But something that I realized when I would go out and do field visits is that someone would have to stop and give me a brief intentionally, that's the rules, that's supposed to happen. But it would be handy if I come walking up to a job and I was able to just observe the the pre-job brief as I walk up. So what we did is we made dry erase magnets and had those printed up. So in addition to doing the online documented pre-job brief. The crews also take the time to write out the pre-job brief on a dry erase magnet, and that's posted on the one of the bucket trucks right at the job there. So when an unschooled person such as myself comes walking up, there it is right there. I can see the 6 requirements of the pre-job brief are all filled out right there, including what feeder and what substation the crew is working on. And in that case, when something happens, when the stuff hits the fan, it may be your least experienced person who has to get on the radio and make the call. And they may or may not have the wherewithal to remember what circuit we're on, what substation that circuit is out of, what address you're at.
And that's all written down on these magnets, which are affixed to the bucket. And so they have an obvious cheat sheet and an easy reference there. I love it. It's such an old school solution in a high-tech world, right? It's not, hey, we deploy AI as a way to kind of better understand it. We're saying, no, write it down, put it there, make it visible to everybody so they can get caught up quickly.
And if that's one thing I am, it's old school, that's for sure. Anybody will tell you around here. But and then you talked about the Swiss cheese model. So I love the Swiss cheese model. So what that's saying is that the hazards are always out there. The hazards are like a laser beam pointed at us, and the laser beam is always trying to get at us. But we put pieces of Swiss cheese between us and the laser. And those the pieces of Swiss cheese are like your engineering controls, such as guards, like you mentioned earlier, administrative controls, the rules, that sort of thing. Our work processes and our training, that's another piece of that cheese. Our PPE and cover and that sort of thing, that is another of those pieces of Swiss cheese. The problem with Swiss cheese is that it has holes in it. And you can think of the holes as complacency. So every time we say it can't happen, the holes in that Swiss cheese get a little bigger. And the holes in the Swiss cheese, as each entity that's in charge of those slices says it can't happen, then those holes start to line up. And eventually the holes all line up and the laser beam gets through and the hazard gets to us.
All right, let me make sure I understand the metaphor. So the idea, the cheese serves as a metaphor for if slice of bread 1 is the worker, slice of bread 2 is the potential danger out there. The Swiss cheese serves as a barrier protecting that. But all programs, all ideas, all concepts have flaws. And what you're saying is when you stack layers protecting it, then second layer may cover the first one. And so you institute policies and procedures to make sure you have many layers to protect both your piece of bread from getting electrocuted or falling off a thing or getting hit by a tree limb or whatever those dangers are.
Right, exactly. And as you said, those flaws, they can line up. And we have the tendency of saying it can't happen. And when we do that at every level, it can't happen. And we have a tendency of saying, well, you know what, even if it does happen, the next layer will stop it. The next layer will catch it. And that complacency is what allows the hazards to get through the holes in the Swiss cheese and get to us.
So Glenn, how does that work in practicality? Is it, okay, this is protection layer number 1. What are you're doing an evaluation. What are the flaws in that first layer of protection? I'll give a silly analogy. I grew up working in a restaurant business, right? That's how I got through college and everything. And the new guy would always do the same thing. You take a dry cloth to take a pan out of the oven, right? And they would always think, well, I need to moisten it to be cool, but water transmits heat, obviously electricity, more efficiently than a dry towel does. So they make that mistake. They have a layer of protection, but there's a clear flaw in that. So evaluating that, give me an example of how that analysis works in your job, in your business.
Well, if I can give you a non-electric utility,
Listen, we're talking about cheese, we're talking about ovens. Go ahead.
yeah. So an example that I love to use in training every now and then with the troops is an incident that happened in 1980 in Damascus, Arkansas. The United States Air Force almost launched a Titan II missile in the United States, and it just so happens that that missile had an 8 megaton nuclear device on it. So you've got a fueling team up there, and the fueling team is using the wrong wrench, and the platform that they're standing on has the rubber bumper is degraded over time, and on and on. And again, it was a situation where it can't happen. You got two guys hanging on to two parts of a wrench. It can't happen. It can't drop. And when the socket came off the wrench and it dropped, well, it's okay. It can't happen. It can't get past the platform. Well, when the socket got past the platform, well, no big deal. It can't happen. It can't take a mean bounce at the bottom of the silo. Well, it took a mean bounce at the bottom of the silo. And then when it took a mean bounce, well, it can't happen. It's a round socket. It can't punch a hole in the side of a missile. Well, it punched a hole in the side of the missile. And the next thing you know, you've got hypergolic fuel leaking out into the silo. And the next thing you know, then the 7 hours later, the missile blew up in the silo. So,
well, you're the guy, like, if something bad can happen, it will happen. Aren't you? You're like the joy of every cocktail party. Don't talk to Glen Moehling, man. He's going to talk about how this is going to go bad.
You have to sometimes be a little bit of a pessimist. You have to be a little bit paranoid.
Well, that's your job, right? I mean, your job is to say, where are the holes in the Swiss cheese?
Exactly.
Right?
Got to be a little paranoid. Got to be Charlie Brown.
Possibly go wrong. It will go wrong.
It can. And I guess that is the point of the Swiss cheese model, is that, guess what, gang? It can go wrong. It can happen. And all those pieces of cheese can line up if we continuously say it can't happen.
So as somebody who's not, obviously I'm not a lineman, I'm not working in utility, but where do, obviously your job, you've been doing this a long time, you clearly know your business. Where do most serious accidents occur? What I envision as a novice, it's the dude climbing up on a pole, falls off the pole. Oh, that's obviously one. Two, they're cutting a limb. They cut it the wrong way. It falls and breaks his arm or her arm. Those seem to Steve as the most likely accidents. And I'm pretty confident you're going to tell me you're missing some big ones. Tell me what those big ones are.
Well, and it doesn't take a big one to end up with a lost time incident. We look back at our OSHA 300 log, that's the log that you keep for your recordable and your reportable incidents. If I look back at that over the years, the individuals, the division that those individuals work for, and the work that those individuals were doing, I could easily say that at least 30% of those lost time incidents had nothing to do with line work. I always say it's the oddball stuff that seems to get us. I had an admin supervisor who was setting up for an event in our truck shed, and she spun around to do something and wrenched her knee and landed on the ground and in horrible pain, and ended up as a lost time incident. We had an engineer who was helping, who volunteered to help do an inventory over at the warehouse, and ended up with a lost time injury just moving a pallet of stuff. So these are the weird things that happen. We really, really focus on the line work, which obviously is important and obviously is probably the most hazardous stuff that we do here in the utility. But we have to pay attention to the oddball jobs, the atypical jobs, whether those people that are doing those jobs are line workers or admins or engineers or office workers, whoever.
So even in those instances, a person turns and they throw out their knee. Are you still doing that forensic uh, post analysis on that kind of stuff as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a workplace lost time incident. In the HR risk world, that's still dollars and cents. In the human world, that's still a friend of ours, a family member of ours who is in pain and is now, out of work, sitting at home, wondering what the heck went wrong.
And I think that's the kind of stuff that gives rise to, like when you go to Home Depot or Lowe's, and the employee is going to lift something, they have to put the back brace on uh, by rule. To say, listen, way to reduce back injuries is to make sure you have that back brace on, which leads to awareness, really more than anything, but to keep your back safe because that's the kind of injury. So it's interesting. So what you're saying is we focus a lot on the lineman stuff because that's critical, right? And there's current and height and limbs and lots of stuff there, but it's the non stuff that we may not be as paying as much attention to. People are moving, they're moving around, they're loading stuff, they're doing physical activity, and that's the kind of stuff we also need to pay deep attention to.
Absolutely.
The talk to me a little bit about when I hear the word emergency, right? So you have an outage of some sort or a post-storm event, and there's a heightened sense of we got to get the job done, right? Listen, every storm, post-storm, anyway, we're talking about afternoon summer storms, we're talking about tornadoes, we're talking obviously about hurricanes. There's enormous pressure from the public and the politicians to get the lights back on, to get things going. We'll call that, my little bunny ears, air quotes, emergencies. How do you, as the guy with the longest title in the world, the key part of that title is safety, how do you engage a culture to say, guys, it's that old stop, look, and listen. How do you engage a culture to say, yes, we have an urgency here. We have a demanding public. We have demanding politicians, but our concern first and foremost is for your safety, safely always. How do you engage that culture so that people understand that's the true value set of the organization?
Well, right. So in everyday operations, we use our switching and tagging policy to do things right. And we had a urgency versus emergency mentality when I first started here. And we had to kind of step back and define that. The power being out is not an emergency. All right. Yes, we wish to be urgent about getting the power back on, but a crude example that I use in training from time to time is, listen, if there's some lines down, energized across a busload of nuns, arcing and sparking and starting a fire, that's an emergency. And our switching and tagging policy defines that and addresses a situation like that as creating a de-energized state in an emergency situation. That's an emergency. Power out is not an urgency. And we had a man, I got to get there. The power's out. This is an emergency. We got to get there. And our driving was poor, and our taking risks was poor. And we had to, through training and just experience, kind of replace that mentality with, okay, yes, power's out, slow down, Let's make sure that everybody's safe, make sure that everything is being done correctly, and then we'll do some unscheduled switching if we have to get the power back on. If it's an emergency situation, that situation with the busload of nuns, then we'll do some emergency switching, but only what has to be done to create a de-energized state so that things are safe. Then we'll go back into an urgent situation and make repairs and get the power back on.
I mean, that's got to be tough to constantly, because listen, we're all a little bit competitive, and I know people in your business and the people putting those things back together, they want to get the job done quickly. And I love by classifying it, I believe strongly in the power of words. And by saying it's urgent, but it's not an emergency, that in and of itself says from the top down, folks, we're going to appreciate your safety first. And that old line from the old Ten Commandments movie, "Dead slaves make none," from Charlton Heston famously said, right? Hey guys, we want you to be productive. We want you to be out there. But let me ask you, so there's a lot of that goes into process and procedure and putting the magnetic things on the buckets for, and that's a communication issue, which I love because, passing the baton to the next person down the line is critical by writing it down. It's great. But then there's general things like, as we know, after a storm, people have to work double shifts, et cetera. How do you manage that so that you don't have exhausted people getting up in a bucket or climbing a pole or engaging in some sort of electric circuitry when they're losing mental capacity? What's the judgment for that? And what is the procedure and policies for that?
Well, we have a very strict 16-hour maximum, which is exhausting. After Irma, when Irma came through, it took us 8 days to restore power. And I can tell you, as a new safety guy in 2017, I was in awe of what the line people were capable of doing. It was hot. It was,
Yeah, you make 16-hour days sound like that's a walk in the park when it's 100 degrees outside.
Right, exactly. And I saw people's hands deteriorating from the sweat in the gloves. And Florida hadn't had a major hurricane hit for 11 years prior to Irma. So I would say that even though I was new, the utility was out of practice, so to speak. And we've come a long way with our work practices in the last 10 years with storm restoration. But, it really is just a matter of making sure that, everyone is well rested as well as they can be after 16 hours in the heat, and well fed and well hydrated. Those are the biggest things. We also do an awful lot as far as, look, gang, we know we're in storm restoration. We know that we're in that mode right now. But we always remind our field individuals, remind everyone, hey, everybody, the rules still apply. And especially now, the rules still apply because things can be really, really bad, as we all know. The public, God love them, the public goes nuts after the storm, it seems to me, especially when it comes to driving. Everybody seems to want to either be in a hurry.
We go to Lord of the Flies in like 20 minutes. We're like, yeah. Lord of the Flies. We go to Lord of the Flies in 20 minutes after a storm.
Right, exactly. We want
take away people's Wi-Fi and they lose their minds.
They want to see what the damage looks like, and they want to get around and see all of that, and they'll take extra hazards to get around that tree limb that's down, and so on and so forth. And on top of that, then the longer the outage goes on, the more ingenious it seems that people get to get their power back on, if they have to do it themselves, and B, figure out a way to kill linemen. You've got.
God, I never thought about that. That the safety issue. I had been very linear in my thinking that it's about climbing up on poles, it's about dealing with electricity. But then you have it's like you read about like software and phishing and all that, and then they say the hardware is not the problem, the software is not the problem, the peopleware is the problem. And what you're saying, Glenn, I think is the peopleware in this regard. They're putting us in danger. They're putting themselves in danger unwittingly or wittingly.
Right. And the amount of generators that have been purchased, I can say since Irma, I'm sure it's a huge amount of generators that are out there now, including and solar and everything else. So you're relying on those disconnect switches. You're relying on people, as I said, to not get ingenious and backfeed the entire neighborhood, and put the public in danger, put the line workers in danger.
Tell me how they put line workers in danger. I'm not clear on that.
So if I buy myself a portable generator, some people will get ingenious and figure out a way to backfeed their entire house off of that generator. Unfortunately, sometimes they forget to turn off the main breaker, or they'll bypass a disconnect switch or something like that. And next thing you know, then they're putting power not only into their house, but back out onto the distribution lines. And the
So they're powering up a line that somebody might be working on and repairing.
Absolutely.
How often does that happen? I guess more since Irma, right?
Well, yeah, it certainly can happen at any time. There was one instance where an individual had everything done correctly, that he had his house, the electrical circuits in his house were split so that the generator would only run a certain part of the house, what they would call critical circuits within the house, and the disconnect switch would disconnect everything going back to the system. Well, this guy got real ingenious, and he kind of bypassed all of that. And make a long story short, the generator was kicking on and off because it was seeing power on the supply side, because when the generator kicked on and the bypass that this guy did inside his house made the generator think that the power had come back on again. So the generator was turning on and shutting off and turning on and shutting off. And line workers were out there working, and it just so happened that they were working every time they touched the line, the generator was off. And until the sequence didn't match up. Next thing you know, the generator's coming on, and the line worker comes in contact with the line, and an incident occurs. So I mean, just ingenious stuff like that. There was another one where two brothers.
Glenn, you're using the word ingenious. I'm using the word stupid, but that I can do that because I'm the host here.
Okay. What was another one where two brothers had property that next to each other, abutted each other, and they were sharing a well, a deep well that ran on 240 volts. And again, difficult to explain without diagrams and charts and so forth, but they didn't trust each other. So what they did is they ran 120 volts from each direction, from their houses to the well, to kind of share the expense of the well. And the power was out from the one brother's side, but the backfeed came from the other brother's side through the well back onto the line where the power was out. It was really you
sounds like a made-for-reality TV show. It's
right, exactly.
The Fighting Brothers.
Exactly. Again, hard to describe without charts and graphs, but the ingenuity, how about we say that word, the ingenuity of sharing the power on that well really put the line workers in jeopardy. And this is why isolate, test, and ground. The incident that happened in that case would not have happened had they isolated, tested, and grounded. thankfully that wasn't our utility. Unfortunately for the utility that it was, someone ended up getting hurt in that situation.
Unfortunate. So you've developed this internal culture. You've shown that you do truly value, and I mean it, capital VALUE, safety priorities over all things. Unless and until we have a busload of nuns. Very specific example. When you're dealing with a mutual aid, now I firmly believe that every utility period prioritizes safety, but you've gone deeper. You not just prioritize, you made it part of your value set. So you're bringing in workers from another community. How do you align your values with their values? Because a lot of times you're doing it on the fly. Is it something you develop up front? How does that work? Because you've got hundreds of people working for you. They're trained. They know how to work. They know what your priorities are. They know what your values are. But the folks coming in, shared, I'm just going to pull Dothan, Alabama out of my ear, coming in from Dothan or Macon, Georgia, how do you assure that they're in line with your value set?
Well, and I don't know that we do anything all that unique. I'm sure other utilities do the same sorts of things, but it starts with that safety briefing when they first come in. We introduce them to our switching and tagging. We'll introduce them to any special uniqueness about our system.
Teach them how to use a magic marker.
In many cases, I have offered them the dry erase magnets for their crews, for their trucks. Like other utilities, we have bird dogs where a lineman will go out with the crews, the mutual aid crews, and so forth to kind of run liaison between system operations center for switching and tagging purposes, for the uniqueness of our system purposes. We also, one thing we did do that may be unique is that we have a storm restoration handbook for mutual aid crews. And in that handbook, it's got your typical information about the utility, contact numbers, where
basic things they need to know.
Where the emergency rooms are.
I always saw it as either and you'll correct me, either an integrate or a relegate. In other words, integrate, they immediately come in, they're part of the team at the same level, or you relegate, say, guys, we'll handle the dangerous, difficult, technical stuff. You assist in these other non-technical, non-dangerous things. I mean, do you integrate or do you relegate, or a little bit of both?
Probably a little bit of both, but more, I feel like, and I'm not the subject matter expert on the storm restoration process, but from my perspective, it is more a matter of integrating. I don't think we have the capacity to not integrate. When you're trying to get the power back on, you've got a lot of your systems sitting on the ground. You have to have the visiting crews, the assisting crews do that high tech stuff. But that's where that bird dog comes in to run the liaison to make sure that things are being done correctly.
Excellent. Well, I have one last question for you, Glenn. Your job is all about risk mitigation, right? I mean, it's to take every step, both whether it's person's loading a dock, driving, or up on a power pole. So your job is about risk mitigation. Most people, and I would be one of those people, would say riding a motorcycle is a dangerous thing. Yet our chief safety compliance officer with the longest title on the planet, Glen Moehling, rides a motorcycle every day. What does that tell me about you that our listeners would love to hear?
Well, well, first of all, I've ridden a motorcycle for 40 something years. So it's, part of my soul, but, I believe that there's a way of going about it that can at least mitigate some of that risk. And it starts with the rules. My father, never liked motorcycles, and he gave me a hard time about it. And I said, well, Pop, that speed limit thing, that's number one. You see these guys zipping in and out of traffic and so forth, and those are the motorcycle riders you think about. Earlier on, we talked about being a little paranoid, and when I'm on the bike, I'm a little paranoid, and I'm my senses are just that much higher. I always tell people, if you want to be a defensive driver, ride a motorcycle in Florida, and be a little paranoid, and keep yourself alive. An example that I use, or a person that I use as an example, there's a safety professional by the name of Carl Potter, and I love his approach to safety. We use his tailgate meetings as safety meeting topics, but he's a private pilot, and you think to yourself, well, that's crazy, a safety guy as a private pilot. But if you think about it, the level of rules that need to be followed to be a private pilot, to mitigate those risks. So when I think about Carl and being a private pilot, I kind of apply the same mentality to riding the motorcycle, is that I can mitigate a certain amount of that additional risk by really, really following the rules. And that's not just the rules of the road, but the rules of maintenance, the rules of self-awareness, all of those things.
It's
They
funny,
all.
Glenn, because you say that, and I think of myself as very risk averse, but I love to ride my bicycle. I ride it in the woods. I ride it in the woods at night. I ride it at the refuge. I ride it on the street. And you're right. If you take, it makes you more aware. And I guess where I saw it when I first read it as an inconsistency, as you're speaking, I'm realizing, no, this is a consistency, because in order to put your butt on a two-wheeler, you have to be extra cautious, extra aware of the rules, extra aware of the protocols. And then you also have to be way more observant. Listen, if I'm sitting in my Audi with a roll cage and 47 airbags and a pyrotechnic device that explodes my seatbelt if I go to roll over, and all these really cool safety features, I could be just a little less aware. Okay. But if you're on a motorcycle, you're not checking your texts while you're riding. You're being much more aware of traffic and surrounding traffic. And so I guess it creates a sense of heightened awareness and hyper vigilance towards their safety rules.
Yeah, and earlier on, you mentioned, it's interesting that you mentioned a back brace. If you're working at Lowe's or a warehouse or something like that, and the workers are supposed to put on a back brace. I worked at a location where that kind of became the trend. Let's all put on back braces, and we had more back injuries as a result of people getting a false sense of security. I got this back brace on, so I can really do some lifting now. My other vehicle is a Jeep. And, I think you can get a false sense of security that, that roll bar, the airbags, all that stuff is going to keep me that much safer. Not necessarily. People still get killed every day in four-wheeled vehicles, maybe because they don't have that heightened sense of awareness.
I love that. I was listening to interviews many, many years ago. The Wallenda brothers were people from circuses back in the 1800s and from Poland. And in this interview, one of the heirs of the Wallenda brother legacies was being interviewed, and he said, "We never started getting hurt until they mandated safety nets. And once there was a safety net, it gave us a false sense of security. And so we started to do things that we otherwise would never do, because when you're practicing without a safety net, you're not taking chances. I mean, you're taking chances by being on a trapeze as it is, but wants the safety net. So that's a really good point, Glenn. Now, and you as a safety officer have to balance that to make sure it's safe, right? So they have that harness that clicks onto the truck and do all these things, but without creating a false sense of security.
That's right. That's right. When the Golden Gate Bridge was built, there were only two incidences in that entire 10-year project. And one of those instances, which actually killed 10 of the 11 people killed during the building of that bridge, was a mechanical material failure. And so you could say that there really was only one human error incident on the entire 10-year project of building the Golden Gate Bridge.
That's amazing. Glenn, this is, I told you it would only be 35 to 40 minutes. We're looking at an hour. I apologize for running over time, but I have been completely captivated by what you've saying. I've learned so much, and I really hope the people listening and your colleagues will get out of this as much as I did.
I had a great time. Thank you, Steve.
Glenn, I appreciate it. Folks, this is Steve Vancore, and you've been listening to the Florida Public Powercast, sponsored by Danella Grid and Storm Services and brought to you by the Florida Municipal Electric Association, your statewide voice for public power. Thank you for listening.